Well, guys, we are having a manly discussion, and I got a bunch of men. That's a good thing to do for a discussion like this. To talk about kind of just culture and our experiences, because oftentimes I think we can feel, I don't know, just a little intimidated or limited in what a man is kind of culturally versus maybe what we experience in our own life. And so I thought a fun way to start off would be, hey, when you were growing up, was there I don't know, some kind of pop culture figure or some kind of, I don't know, some kind of superhero or something that you kind of just thought, man, this is like the definition of masculinity right here. Like this is what it means to be a man. Can you guys think of anybody?
Yeah, Indiana
like
Jones.
That? Indiana Jones.
He's the man.
Good, strong choice.
Yeah. Also really like the jacket.
He's got the whip too.
Yeah,
He's pretty impressive.
And he gets the ladies, you know.
He does.
He's
yeah.
And the hat. He's got lots going for
It's
him.
nice to be Harrison Ford.
It is. It is. Always aloof,
Yeah.
but just with it at the same time.
Yeah. Okay.
For me, I'm a little less proud of mine. Mine would be Ric Flair, who is
The wrestler.
the wrestler. Yeah, with the wavy blonde hair, and his one move that he did over and over again was that he would just shout into the crowd, which I always thought was pretty awesome. But he would land a punch and then he would woo, and he would just yell. And
Was it the hair or the tights that you like?
touche, Terry. A little bit of both. I felt like they both represented what a man should be. Ric Flair was awesome for me. Yeah,
All right. Well, we'll see you at WrestleMania.
that's
next
right,
time.
man.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that'd be great.
Yeah.
Batman, that's me. Yeah, I don't, and not the tight. I like his money. Yeah, and he's able to like go and like at nighttime and do whatever he wants, and all the money he's doing.
So you liked Batman because of the money?
Oh yeah, who
So,
likes Spider-Man?
Bruce?
Like he's poor.
I always did like that Batman's superpower was really just that he had a lot of money that he could
Oh,
buy
yeah.
things.
And gadgets.
Yeah.
He
And
had
gadgets.
lots of
There
cool
was
A lot of
everything
gadgets.
else. It's like
Yeah.
I can do that. You know,
He had a
just
cool
make lot of
belt.
money.
I can be a superhero if I have a billion. I'm a billionaire.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
My grandson likes Batman, so I won't say anything bad about that.
Fair enough.
I think for me it was John Wayne. He was just the
John.
epitome of what a man was. A 6'4", big burly guy, who beat up everybody. He was the hero in all his westerns, and I think just John Wayne stays with me.
It's funny that all of ours are like coming from movies, and in a sense, mine, which is a little embarrassing as well. I was a child of the '80s, so it was MacGyver.
Yeah.
MacGyver, you know, and I liked how handy he was, and
Sure.
he had a mullet at a time, which
was
pretty
killing.
Pretty
He
killer.
rocked the mullet.
He did.
That's what it means to be a man.
Okay.
If you can pull off a mullet, then that's
Yeah.
great. So
And blow up everything he sees.
that's with science in
Yeah,
a lot
with
of ways. That was
Science.
impressive.
Science
Yeah.
is, yeah.
With a
He
lot
made
of
it cool for a lot of
It
people.
was
He
cool
put
for
science
me.
on the map, for at least for me, in a
he
big
did-
way.
He did for me too. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, I think like in some ways it's funny that early on I think we get an image portrayed to us on what it means to be a guy. Sometimes that image comes from pop culture, but sometimes it comes even more personally. Just talk to me about that a little bit from your upbringing, as far as like either your dad or somebody in your family, of how that shaped your idea of what it means to be a man, and how that affected you one way or the other. I'd just like to talk about that.
Yeah, I don't grow up with my dad. I grow up with my relatives. My dad basically give me this worldview or a life philosophy. It's basically just life is tough and suck it up. And even though I didn't get a chance to spend a lot of time with him, but I think that kind of really stuck with me, and that's how I kind of view life or view to be a man, is to like, hey, whatever challenges comes in, whatever difficulties, I'll just suck it up. I'll be the biggest sucker, and just overcome it and just move on.
Okay.
Yeah.
I grew up without a dad as well. My dad divorced my mom when I was probably 4 or 5 and died when I was like 11 or 12. So I had no male input in my life at all. Just never probably even really thought about what it meant to be a man. I think I just turned 17, joined the Army, and you were a man at that point. So with really no training or advice or guidance at all growing up.
Did that impact, I mean, as far as, is that something where you feel like, okay, I'm carrying a lot of that with me today, or is that something where you're, or is that something where you're like, okay, whatever, my dad wasn't there, and
Yeah, I've talked a lot with a friend of mine that I meet with every Wednesday night, and I don't feel like it does. I mean, I don't have any hatred or anger towards my dad for not being around. That was just life. He was gone, and my mom did a great job of raising 4 boys, and we just dealt with life. But I don't feel like I have any anger or bitterness towards him at all. He was gone.
And yeah,
No, please go ahead.
I was just saying, Andy. I mean, just knowing that you didn't grow up with your dad really present. I mean, in some ways, like, is that a similar thing for you? As far as like, is that something where you're like, okay, that was a big detriment to me, and I'm working through that, or?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think I'll react to it or overreact to it. That either I always feel guilty that I don't spend enough time with my daughters or with my wife, or that I will have to follow suit like what he does and just kind of keep going and take career and work and bring money on the top priorities and forget anything. So it's somewhere between the two polar extremes and just kind of swing back and forth. And sometimes it's difficult to find a balance. Yeah. And yeah, it just kind of get me into that struggles on all the time. Yeah.
You know, I think for me growing up, my dad's still around, still married to my mom, and you know, and I have a good relationship with my dad. But I think growing up, I think that cultures and cities and even families, you sort of cultivate what you celebrate. And there were certain things that were celebrated in my family, and especially celebrated by my dad. And things like being really good in sports and being able to fix things and like build things or whatever. And so when I left home or when I graduated, I was, you know, I worked hard and I could fix things and I was good in sports, you know, those kind of things. But pretty much anything, any of the softer skills that I've needed, you know, on like how to really build a great friendship with another guy, or how to pursue a woman in a good way, how to listen well, how to, you know, any of those types of things I've had to learn since leaving home. And so it became pretty clear, and I went off to college, that I was kind of lopsided, you know, and some skills that, and what it means, what I feel like it means to be not just a man, but to be a kind of a successful one, or so it's just kind of strange, you know, if that makes sense.
That's kind of like your reaction to a degree, right? That, you know.
Yeah, and it's weird because I think that, you know, I mean, you get guys talking about their dads, and it can go a lot of different ways, you know. I mean, it can, and I love my dad, and he was great at a lot of, he was also just faithful to my mom, and so I think I learned that as well, you know, just sort of being there and stuff. But a lot of the guys, especially that I know, and they talk, I mean, it just wasn't great with their dads, you know. And I think that there's a tendency to not to just want to be really careful that we don't emulate, you know, and we can sort of react, which typically is an overreaction. And I think I see that a lot too, you know, and it's just, it can kind of become a spiral and all that kind of stuff. And I think that there's been a little bit of that in me, you know, like I kind of left a pretty masculine home and I went and pursued the arts, you know, and there's a little bit of a reaction probably, and I've tried to temper that and make sure it's not an overreaction, but that's a really tricky thing with guys and their dads, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I know for me personally, as I grew up, I began to see this action-reaction kind of playing out, because my dad had a dad who loved him, no doubt, but just didn't provide for him very well. And so being the middle child, realized that a lot of what he expected to be given to him based on what was given to his older brother just wasn't. And because he felt an absence of that provision for himself, he made sure that I felt very provided for as the only child. And thinking through, like, he's doing that because he's reacting to what wasn't given to him. And so one thing that he said to me a lot growing up, and I didn't understand it as a young guy, but he would just say, "I want you to be free." And I felt like that was kind of a strange phrase at different times. Like, we would be hunting and I would shoot a deer and he'd be like, "I just want you to be free." And all right, I want to be free as well.
Shoot your way out.
Exactly, yes. Maybe out of this deer blind, but and that was just me not knowing exactly what he was saying.
Yeah.
The provision for him in his mind equated freedom. He didn't get to go to college the way that he thought he was going to go, and so provision for him was, and I didn't have it, so I want to make sure that I have it for my son, and so I have a great relationship with him, and I'm blessed by that, and I think to me it means, hey, that's a level of care as a man that I want to continue for my children. But it's definitely something that's made a mark on me and how I see what a man is and how he carries himself.
Interesting, because there is kind of back and forth kind of reaction kind of thing. Like I don't know as much about my father's relationship with his dad. I've gotten snippets of that. But I know that my dad was always great about verbally expressing like his love for me. I always felt that, which I'm super appreciative of. And my dad is very handy. Like he taught me how to fix things. He's a woodworker, very practical around the house. Boy Scouts, we did Boy Scouts together. I learned all of that. But it was interesting that when I got to about, I'd say 10, 11, I started to get a picture kind of from some of my friends, some of my guy friends that I would hang around school, that was kind of a different expectation of masculinity. It was kind of like sports, and I didn't grow up playing sports all that much, or even the movies and pop culture and concerts and all that. And we were kind of more separated from that, a little bit more of a bubble. And so I know for me, my journey of going to high school and college was more about embracing a lot of that. And I'm actually not very handy today in some ways because of that reaction. And so I have a question for us that, because I think it kind of relates to that sort of that expectation of masculinity that maybe is different than what internally we feel. Almost like a fake it till we make it, sort of like, okay, this is culturally, whatever that looks like for you, an expectation of what it means to be a man that has been placed on me that maybe inside I don't really feel like I live up to. Can you guys think of something like that for you where you're like, okay, I would actually, if anybody knew this about me, they may not put this in the man column, kind of thing, but it is who I am, it may not fit expectation.
I like to flip and look through fashion magazines from time to time. And I would like to comment on women's shoes or men's shirts from time to time.
You're dressed very nicely today, Andy.
Thank you.
You bring it out.
I bring it out. And I don't like hunting, or I don't like to kill things.
Okay.
Yeah, in general.
It'll keep you out of jail.
Either it's a deer or chicken. I like to kill things, and I like to talk about colorations and different things in more towards you call it the feminine side, you may call it. I went to engineering school, and I'm a professional licensed architect, but I work with interior design firms, and most of my coworkers are women or men with a pretty good design taste. And I am one of those rare that is in the stay in a stable relationship, raise kids, that type. But I work well with most of majority of my coworkers. I don't like to confront people. I don't go punch people in the face in a meeting or anything like that. Good to know that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to know.
So if you do that right now, we'll know you're really mad.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. Or you're faking it.
Faking it.
Yeah, exactly.
So with that, Andy, do you feel the tension between like who you feel like you are and kind of who culture says you're supposed to be? Do you feel that tension?
Yeah, absolutely. Like an example is that my wife works for a construction firm, and Sunday night evening that both of us need to watch the news, what's the latest sports thing that on the TV, so that I can update her so that she can have a conversation in the office. And I had to force myself to do that at some point too. I mean, I love watching football and all that, but it's not that I'm never an Alabama fan.
Nobody's really.
Wow.
Yeah. So the tension is there that I couldn't really. I think that if there's a tension, I would say that there's a tension that I feel like I cannot fully lift out the gift that God entrusted me, in a sense, because that does not fit into an expectation of a man. Whatever that expectation is coming from is from my parents or from the community, from social media, whatever that is. So there's a tension within it.
I think that happens a lot with men too. Again, I experienced that same kind of struggle, is trying to find out who you really are as a man. And throughout the course of my life, I found myself in different seasons of life hanging out with different people. And there was a season of life, a friend of mine was a professional bull rider. So I hung out with mostly cowboys, and I wanted to be a part of that environment. And I really learned that really wasn't me. I mean, I got on some bulls and rode them, but I was scared to death to do it. It wasn't really what I wanted to do, but it was the expectation of hanging out with those people. And so I go through my life trying to figure out who am I, and really it can be anybody. If fashion magazines is who you are, then that doesn't make you less of a man. It just really tells me that you figured out who you are and you're comfortable with it. And for me, it was trying to figure out where am I as a man and what am I comfortable with, and trying to live into being that.
That means a lot from a guy driver.
A Harley, yeah. I was just going to
The
say,
backwards hat. And
yeah, because Eric, when you and I sort of talked about this conversation, and who brainstormed who would be good in this conversation, and we said we need a man's man in there, kind of guy that makes everyone else feel a little insecure, and it was you, Terry. So because I just see you as a guy who's, just strong, capable, like a lot of things that a lot of men want to be. And so that's really interesting to hear that you would struggle with the same things, because I would not have expected that coming from you.
I think the difference, again, the older I get, is just being honest with yourself. And again, no man is perfect. We all have faults and we all struggle in areas. It's a question of whether you're willing to be authentic about it and share it with people.
I think for me, I've kind of learned what are probably just like coping skills, like in guy culture, like I've learned how to talk about hunting. I've learned how to talk about, certain things and that I don't really care about because you kind of have to fit in, And really, if the conversation is about, if it's like deeper than just cursory conversation about sports, if they're like talking about like draft picks and all that, it's like, I don't know any of that stuff. So if it's a conversation about sports or hunting or like real like business stuff or finance, and things like that, or fixing like fixing cars or whatever, like any of those things, I'm just faking it when we have those conversations. But it's interesting, like when you look at those categories, that is like mostly when guys get together, that's 80% of what they talk about. It's sports or it's their business, it's like all that kind of stuff. And so you do kind of fake it because you don't want to be the weirdo, it's like, and so yeah, but one of the things I've also learned, and like if like within a church culture or a group of friends, if they can get beyond kind of those categories that can kind of tend to divide us or like those surfacey things, I've really sensed that I think most guys are kind of struggling with a lot of the same things. Regardless, this person could be a big hunter and this person could be in fashion magazines or whatever. It's like you get beyond that level, and the conversation becomes much more helpful, but that's hard to do. And so you do kind of fake it till you make it, and a lot of times I think in a lot of guy culture things, you never move beyond that. Like that's where the conversation stays forever. And that can leave guys feeling like they just don't have any place to belong when really they probably do. It's just we're all, talking at a certain level.
And I think a lot of that has to do with identity. When you ask usually, hey, who are you? What are you about? What people list off is what they do, their career or their activities. And this is what I'm a hunter, I'm a fisher, I work on cars, I do this, I do that. And so much of our identity and culture today is exactly what we do. And I think a lot of us are trying to figure out who we are. And so what happens is you have these conversations and they do stay pretty shallow, unfortunately, because a lot of it is just pretty surface level. And I found that in my own life. I have stretched so many conversations and my limited activity in certain things to try to appear as if I can be classified as a hunter or a fixer or a whatever. I mean, I've literally said to someone I remember saying to someone in college, yeah, I'm pretty handy. I made a birdhouse one time. That was in 5th grade. And it stunk. I put it up on the tree and the roof fell off. I mean, that's what classifies a house, is it to have walls and a roof, and now it doesn't. So like, I didn't even do that well. And yet that was what I'm gonna pull that out and talk about that. And it's like, accept me. I want to stand next to you guys and feel okay. And it's such a weird thing that happens in our culture, is that we feel that tension and we can stay relatively shallow. And it really is a shame to see that.
Not to riff on you, the manliest of structures is the birdhouse. So I'm glad.
Certainly. It was
the beacon of masculinity.
That's right. It was 2-tier.
Yeah,
all right. It was 2-tier.
A balcony on it too.
It took 2 weekends. Okay. So yeah, and I did use barbed wire to wrap it around to kind of like bulk it
Very
up.
creative.
But thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the important thing again is to identify personally who you feel like you are,
Yeah.
Yes.
and then to live into that and get beyond the expectation of trying to perform for people and live into something that you're really not. And again, as I think about what it means to be a man, to me, it's really not about being a man, because there are a lot of bad adults who are men.
You're male.
That are male, correct?
Yeah.
But I would really ask the question of, are you a good man? To me, that's more important. Where's your integrity? Where are those kind of things, your morals, your values? Those things to me are more important than whether you hunt, fish, or do the arts or the fashion magazine. Are you a man of character? Really sticks out to me.
And that strikes at the core of who you are. I mean, we should all say, first and foremost, we are followers of Jesus. We are disciples. We are his children who are looking to pursue him. And then from my identity in Christ, I let that affect how I see my masculinity. I let that affect how I see myself as a husband, hopefully a potential father at some point. But I start with identity in Christ. And I think if we don't start there, we have a tendency to have this identity crisis where it's a little bit about the hobbies or the activities or something like that. I mean, as a student pastor, that's what I see just running amok with our students right now, is identity crisis, not knowing who they are. And so they reach for things, academics or athletics or whatever, to try to define themselves. And what happens is either there's success there and they continue to be persuaded, or it's just outright failure and they go to the next thing. And it's definitely an issue that stretches into this finding out who we are and then leading out of that, being a man out of that identity in Christ, I think.
That's a good thing for men of children then to really think about again, is don't try to raise your child to be your perception of a man, but try to figure out who they really are, where their heart is, their bent, and teach them to be a man through that, and give them the freedom, set them free to be who they are.
We're having this conversation in a church. We all go to Chase Oaks, and depending on how long you have been involved in the church has shaped your view probably of this topic and kind of what it means to be a man. I'd love to just hear your guys' views on how the church has both helped you define masculinity in maybe a healthy way, but also maybe more focused, because in some ways I think we maybe know that answer. Maybe focus on, has there been a way where maybe the church has pigeonholed manhood, or has been in danger of maybe setting manhood in a box, and where it's like, hey, it's broader than that? Just in your experience, has the church hurt or held you back maybe from feeling like you fit a definition of masculinity?
I think one way that it's really helped was, I mentioned when I kind of went off to college and stuff like that, there was a lot of skills I needed to learn. And I was very fortunate to be a part of a Christian group of guys, kind of a church group that, we encouraged one another towards chivalry and toward, kind of pursuing the girl in in a good way, in a righteous way, not in a hookup kind of way. And I needed that. I needed to sort of have a group of guys that kind of championed that, and that was really good. But then I think later, I think that within the church, there has been over the last several decades a bit of a. It seems to me that several decades ago, it was sort of clear in culture and in church on what a man was supposed to be, and a lot of that was just not good. It was just an error, but it was clear. It was clearly an error, and we've sort of moved away and moved away from some of those things. But I sense sort of within the church, there's not a real clear definition of what is it supposed to be now? You know what I mean? And so there's been sort of some different attempts. Like a few years ago, it was all about sort of being the warrior and like all that kind of stuff, which really kind of struck at the heart for a lot of guys, but not for everybody. You know what I mean? And it was pretty narrow, kind of a narrow definition. And I think that the church is still trying to figure out. I think that you definitely get a sense that men really do need to be softer in certain ways. They need to be better listeners. They need to be what used to be called more feminine traits. Like some of those things men need to have. They need to be more tender. They need to be good listeners. They need to all of those kind of things. But what is it what is the uniqueness that a man brings that's not just a male version of a woman? You know what I mean? Like what is it? And I think that a lot in the Christian, I think that we're still figuring that out. It seems like, and that's I don't know. That's just my take. I don't know if you guys agree with that or not, but.
No, but it seemed like, kind of what you were saying 10, 20, 30 years ago, the image seemed to be, it was like, hey, to be what the church really wants men to be is just nice guys. Like there's almost like this moral guy that would come to church, sit in the pew and just shut up and that would be it. And
which was a reaction against the very macho persona of maybe 50 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Something
right.
like that, right.
And then it seemed like there was kind of a insertion of, well, hey, that's a pretty limited view of masculinity. And so then I remember when I was kind of in the high school range, it was more about, it was the kind of, we're reclaiming this warrior mindset. Let's go out and kill something, maybe a bear. That would end badly for me, at least.
Yeah.
But that was
kill it with a rock.
Kill
right?
it with a rock. Yeah, no, yeah. If it's a gun, it doesn't count. Yeah.
I thought it was a bare hand.
Yeah, you need to wrestle with it.
Or just bare hands. Yeah.
Yeah, which for most of us at this table, that would end badly. Terry would do.
Terry would
just fine.
rock
Terry would
it.
be fine. He'd rise up and the beard would run away.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. I feel like that's kind of what I was resonating with as you were talking. It was like, hey, we felt like we kind of rejected that nice guy image of that's a pretty small view, but in the process, this warrior image, I know I don't always feel like I fit into that mold, and that felt like that was almost the pendulum swinging to the other end. Has that been in your guys' experience?
I remember being in some Bible studies where we specifically talked about that stuff, and I found guys were almost looking at their wives as if they were trying to raise the children and make basically sissies out of them, and the man had to get out, take them camping and hunting and doing all this, what some people would call masculine stuff. And I didn't get that. I mean, to me, I don't see Christian men or young men as being sissies or not being warriors. I didn't get the whole, you need to go out and do A, B, and C to really prove that kind of thing. Again, Andy is the perfect example. If I have no reason to say you're not a man.
Thinking my wife was.
Again, fashion magazines isn't my thing, but that doesn't make him less of a man than me. And again, so that during that whole season of life where pressure was being put on for the church man to raise up and be this warrior, I thought it was bad. I didn't agree with it or like it at all.
I pick up on something different at church. Growing up, without a fatherly figure, so in college life, getting into the church life, the imagery is the pastor who automatically become your fatherly figure. So most of the pastor in the Chinese community is very scholarly, doctorate degree, knows the Bibles inside out and that type. And somehow I pick up on that. So that's my thought is that if I want to be a man, a godly man, will be just like them. And I try, and I try to I went to seminary, and I tried to write my senior thesis, and I tried to get into PhD. Not really get into to taste the waters, like what it feels like to get into PhD. But I funk. I just, like in the middle of it, my professor just goes like, don't even try, just don't do it.
Wow.
and I just couldn't get through it, and I'm just not that type. I guess God never make me like a Master Wu Guai in the Kung Fu Panda movie. I just couldn't do it. So that, if there's one thing that I say the church or limited or in terms of the topic of manhood or man, I would say that it's more or less the church will give this like broad statement or generalize of what that should be. Either is more nicer or more warrior-like, one way or the other. It's with generalizations in terms of just on the topic, rather than giving freedom to every one of us to really figure out what would that look like, what God has called you to be. And I think that would be my experience.
Yeah, for me, I think I was fairly limited. I had a Sunday school teacher that would really harp on the side of Jesus that would get angry and the side of Jesus that would call out truth. And, like to tell the story of Jesus turning over tables often. I felt like that's the one story that we went over and over and over again. And I remember feeling, even as a middle schooler, that that's incredibly one-sided because there is a very gracious side to Jesus. There's a very tender side to our Savior, and trying to figure out where that balance is. And
Jesus did cry.
right, absolutely, yes, he did. He felt those emotions and wasn't afraid to put those on display. And I remember thinking, there's more to this than just the Jesus that would make a whip, and it was like, well, he also did other things, That's awesome, but he also had little children come and sit on his lap. So there was a balance of that. And I went in such again, I feel like pendulum swing is kind of the major theme that we're talking about, but I went from that gentleman to the very next year, another gentleman who overemphasized grace almost to where it was like, there's not a standard, there's no bar, it's just kind of like, yeah, dude, it's your path, figure it out. And it was like, that's not grace, that's just you being confused and not leading us well.
Right.
And so I remember thinking, for me, as a middle schooler, the church didn't help me in a sense of saying there needs to be a balance between grace and truth, and a little bit of both, and that we can love people and love people well, and sometimes that means we have hard conversations as a man. And as we lead, that means that sometimes that's going to be difficult for us. And we do need to call out truth when we see it, but we need to do so in a gracious way, in a winsome way. There wasn't any of that. It was like, be the truth guy. If everything's got to look like a nail, you got to hammer it in. Be a truth guy. Okay. Then the next year it was, well, let's just be a grace person. And I think that's kind of what we've talked about, is there just being a lack of clarity as to what it looks like for men to be men, and having that come from Scripture.
Building off of that, there was a article on NPR I read just before this that was talking about the changing idea of masculinity, and they had a quote that I think I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on it. It's that today's men are seeking to reconcile the old ideas related to strength with the newer ideas to be better listeners, more cooperative, more open, maybe even more gentle. And I know even in a church or in our families, or for those that are watching that are single, that there's this tension in some ways of all right, I want to be, I want to take responsibility in my culture. I don't want to be passive. I feel that call, but I also want to wrestle with the fact that, hey, culture feels different. That masculinity is different than the way that my father or even my grandfather would express masculinity. How do you guys process kind of this balance? It's almost like this pendulum that you're talking about of, on the one hand, wanting to be this strong, I don't want to say authoritative leader, but you know what I mean, to this other side of being this gentle listener, cooperative, more open. How do you guys balance that or think about that?
I think so much of what we think about masculinity comes from our dad and from how we were raised, and so much of what you were just talking about is a reaction to things that were excessive in a certain way. And I think, and we've already mentioned it, but I think that I've just really come to embrace the danger that pretty much every reaction is an overreaction. And I think that actually helps me understand my dad, because he's reacting too, or he was reacting to how he was raised. You know what I mean? And it gives me a little bit more grace, to understand my dad and stuff like that. But so we can sort of look back at the generation before us and see some of the excesses in a certain way, and then we react to it, and we're just sort of creating another pendulum for our own kids, and so this has sort of come up again and again. It's like we seem to want to do this either or. It's either strength, or it's softer and not that kind of stuff. And I think we have not, as American men, we haven't figured this out on what is that middle ground. And what I do think there's a little bit of an identity crisis. And I think that article is right, that we are grappling with those two things. And the result or the answer to that question is yet to be revealed, I feel like.
I think it's important, too, to point out, I think there's a lot of great dads out there. I feel like I was a good dad to my son, but yet I clearly understand I didn't do everything right. And so it's important to understand that dads sometimes do the best that they can with what they know how. It's not that they were evil or cruel or mean. It's just, again, I wasn't raised with a father. I didn't know what it was to be a father until I stepped into the role of being a father. And so now that my son is a father, my hope is that he understands that I did the best I could, take what I didn't do well, and then change it in your life as you become a father to your son, and hopefully improve on that process.
And most dads, I think we're fair to say, some dads are just not good.
Some dads are,
and they're not. But I think you're probably right that most dads are just doing the best they can.
If you were to, I want to ask, it's kind of more of a one-word answer, though you can obviously expand on it if you want to, but kind of fill in the blank to say, when I am doing blank, I feel most like a man. Or if
I do have an answer, but I'm not quite sure it's Sunday appropriate.
Noted.
Okay.
Terry. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, for being honest. Come as you are.
That's right.
Come as you are.
I think just the first thing that pops into my head would be I guess two things pop into my head. One is when I'm building something, I feel like a man. And then I think just kind of going back to some of the things I learned, like in those college days or whatever, like when I feel like I'm pursuing my wife in a way that she really desires and needs to be pursued, where she feels loved. Like I feel like a man when I'm like I feel like I'm understanding my wife. I'm pursuing her in a godly way, like that kind of stuff. Not taking her for granted, and I'm kind of being proactive in that. It makes me feel like a man.
I think that has a lot to do with leading well. And I think I would piggyback on that and say I feel like a man when I feel like I'm leading and not just kind of existing and hoping that a decision is going to be made between the two of us. Taking charge in a way that's helpful for her and knowing how to lead in that way. I think another area where I feel like I'm a man, and it may sound weird, but I probably need to explain it, is when, and this doesn't happen very often, but when I can be selfless to others. Because I feel like when I am able to be selfless with other people, I feel like I'm understanding something about myself and my call as a follower of Christ. And how he lived his life and what it looks like for me to live like he has done. And I feel like those are two things that when I do them, I feel the most manly.
Mine's kind of weird because I probably have to explain it, but when I'm doing yard work, I actually feel that way. I think there's something about strength, and it's interesting because I've never felt like I was the strongest person around. I mean, a lot of that's just body style. I hate weight rooms for a lot of reasons. You can tell I don't clearly go to them very often. And it's because I've always felt like that was a place where I didn't feel like a man, because it felt like if people are gauging my masculinity on how much weight I can lift, which felt like a gauge to me. Like this is something. So if I'm not lifting the amount that you would expect or compete with the other guys, I wouldn't feel much like a man. And that's probably a wound I've carried that then says, okay, when I am able to show some kind of strength or able to persevere in something longer than like do yard work when it's on a hot day, because no one else is there to do it, and it won't happen unless I do it. That coming in, there's a sense of satisfaction for me. That's like, okay, that felt like I accomplished something. So for me, it's like, yeah, it's on those days where it's like something hard that needed to be done, that I did it, and nothing makes me happier than when my wife is like, man, I'm so glad you did that. I wouldn't have been able to do that. That's an affirmation for me that makes me feel that way.
I'm similar. When I feel that I'm being helpful to others, and I feel like I fulfilled that specific call that God calls me to. And then it was talking about being a man, and it's when I can serve my wife and my daughters well. Then when they ask for help and I can really truly help them, and I feel that, oh yes, that's the role that I feel like that's the role that God calls me to be in, and I fulfilled it. And I think on the flip side is when I cannot meet that expectation, and the whole world just crumbles.
I think for me, it's and this is relatively new to me because I never really think about it much as being a man thing. But I think I feel more like a man when I'm able to confess my weaknesses to people and be authentic. And within our life group, we're having some real hard conversations about dysfunction and things like that. And it's hard to admit that you're a dysfunctional husband or father or life group leader or whatever it is. And I shared with our life group a couple months ago that, one of my biggest struggles is to say I'm sorry to somebody. And it's clearly just a pride thing. And I could be dead wrong, but to say I'm sorry comes out, it just won't come there. And so, again, to confess that to this group of people just makes me feel more manly. Again, it's an authentic, it's a weakness, but yet it's a strength that I hope I can grow into, to share that, hey, I'm not this man's man. I am just a man struggling through life, trying to figure it out.
Well, we were talking, in some ways, I think those times where we feel like, hey, we're most like a man, we can kind of even gravitate towards those things and sometimes even become like that guy. You know what I mean? Like that guy that this is my specialty, or kind of overcompensating a little bit. Have you guys seen that in our culture with your friends or even with yourself, where sometimes it's like you so want to get respect from other guys that you almost kind of like overdo it or kind of push it too far?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a buddy in high school who, no matter what we were doing, if it was indoors, outdoors, if he was taking the SAT or he was outside playing soccer, he would find a way to take his shirt off. I mean, it was outrageous.
You could just use my name.
Every time.
I've gotten past that.
Okay, well, thank the Lord. Every time I looked over, it was like, nobody even had to be looking, but it was just that caricature of the crazy guy, the wild and crazy guy. And it was just sad because even when that guy moved past that, which thankfully he did, he still would get labeled as that guy. And he wanted to live, poor guy wanted to just live normally. And people would be like, oh, it's the shirt guy. And he'd be like, yeah. And he felt like he had to continue to do that because he overcompensated for all kinds of stuff with that personality. And it's a shame when that happens, because there's a lot that, when you think about it, there's a lot we can do for our weaknesses so that we don't have to just gravitate towards one strength or one ability or one thing that we have that's good doesn't have to be our only thing, I think.
Yeah, Eric, you talked about, I think you just mentioned like how, like, out of our desire for respect from other, and I just think that's huge among guys. Like and I think it goes really unrecognized in us a lot of times, but we so want the respect from other men that, and we can't do everything. And I think we kind of come to the realization that we can't, but it's like you know, if there's like one category, you know, whether it's sports or hunting or being the party guy or being it's like if there's one thing that I could really be good at and really earn respect, and I just pour everything into it, you know. So I you know, you become the Dallas Cowboys historian, like, you know, every stat about every, you know, it's because that's my thing or whatever. And I think it's driven by just this deep, deep desire for men to respect me. And we just, I think if we could just sort of be able to articulate that in ourselves and be able to diagnose that in ourselves, I think that would be really freeing. And be able to be in community with other guys where we don't, you know, we just don't let that slide. So, you know what I mean? Or we can champion other things or let the conversation go a little bit deeper. And not just be so easily impressed because this is the hunting guy, this is the sports guy or whatever, you know, but ask some deeper questions or something. I see that all the time.
Or sometimes then if somebody challenges us on that one thing, it's like,
right.
It's
you're challenging your identity.
It's fighting words.
Yeah, then that becomes almost like, it goes from being, this is a source of pride or respect that I get to almost a source of anger that controls us. And I know I've seen that in my life where it's like I went through even a period where it's like I'm the funny guy, and if I wasn't funny, then I almost felt like disconnected or got angry about that, and that my identity was shaped around that. You could take almost anything else and critique me on that, but don't critique me on this thing, or don't you know.
Yeah.
And I feel like that seems like a pretty common problem from what we're talking about here, right?
For me, is that there's a level of fear and anxiety when I don't get that respect, or I sense there's a losing control of something. And in particular, if the identity is that I'm going to be that wild guy that take my shirt off, I'm the funny guy, or I'm the guy who knows everything. If I'm being challenged on those things, then there's a level of anxiety just within it. And then to add on to it, because being a man, you're supposed to be fearless. You're supposed to go out there and conquer the world and all that. And among guys, we talk about cowboys, we talk about Mavericks, but you don't talk about, hey, what is your fear? What are you anxious about today? You don't talk about those topics, and you just get buried deeper and deeper. Every time you come around, you just bury as deep as you could. And then you just jump back onto the more superficial things that you're good at or being respected at.
I think it's funny that if that's a desire that we all have to be respected by other men, we certainly don't lead with that. Like we don't say, hey, I'm going to tell you about this 9-point buck that I shot in the hopes that you will think that I'm pretty awesome. Like we don't, you know what I mean? Like we don't like leave the grease on our arms and say, oh, I've been working on my car, so that someone else would say, oh, wow. We don't lead with that often. We just talk about those things in hopes that the respect comes. And it's almost like this weird facade that we play where we talk and secretly we're kind of hoping that it sounds really cool and really awesome. And the other person's like just waiting, like we're going to turn and they're just waiting to put a blue ribbon, you know, a gold medal on our chest. It's weird how that happens, at least in my experience. I felt like that was something I desired but never really communicated.
There is a power, though. It's interesting that since guys tend to be competitive, you know, not all guys are, but tend to be competitive, that it's almost like if we could let go of some of that competitiveness and actually just seek to affirm one another, you know, that actually would mean a lot. I mean, we may not say it that way, like, hey, I really needed you to tell me I was good at this, but if we started to do that more, I know that tends to, it mean a lot for me, and I think it means a lot for other men. We just don't tend to verbalize it that way. So
I think there's another side too. As I listen to you guys talk about overdoing to achieve the respect, I think I actually underdo to get respect. And one of the things I've shared with my life group is, again, obviously I ride a Harley. Our life group is primarily Harley. We hang out with a lot of Harley people. We go to the biker clubs and things like that. So I find myself, because I want their respect, I want to fit in with them, I underdo who I am as a Christian man. You know, again, for me to go to Chili's and pray over dinner is very natural. People in Chili's don't really, it's probably some people in there are praying, some aren't, but they don't pay attention to you. You go to a Strokers down on Harry Hines, and it's all bikers, and some of them are biker gangs that are down there, and we're eating lunch, and I'm looking around like, do I want to pray or don't I want to pray? Again, I underdo my masculinity because I want to fit in or I want to gain the respect rather than overdoing something.
It's interesting.
And sometimes I feel that it's due that not only to among men, but also against women too. And we want to be the guy that who figure everything out.
Yeah.
And we don't need anybody. But if God said that we need a helper, we
Except
need,
for
That's
getting
true.
directions. We're not lost.
we need a helper.
We got Siri for that now, so
Yeah, we
that's
got-
okay. Yeah.
That's right.
Well, guys, thanks for a great conversation about it. I know it helped me kind of expand my views on things. Hope it was helpful for you and for those that are watching.
Let me affirm you. I think you did a very good job.
Man, I wasn't going to say that I needed it, but I'm really glad that you did.
Well, it was
Yeah.
fantastic.
Thanks,
So
Mike.
thank
Thanks,
you
Mike.
so much. Yeah.
Yeah, and you look great today. Let
Oh,
me just tell
thank you.
that, too.
You're
Yeah.
too kind.